Hey, what's up everybody? It's Mike from Cornfield Customs, and today I want to show you how I am making the taillight recessed can for the convertible to get this nice, tidy radius and get the bucket for the taillight. So stick around as I walk you through how I'm making that. So the first thing I had to do was make our backing plate, which is here. I didn't want to just have a flat plate edge welded to the bucket itself. So what I did is I took a couple pieces of plywood like this. It's 3/4. I cut it to the shape of the taillight, and then I sandwich the sheet metal in between the two pieces, drill some holes for bolts there, and I make a hammer form. So I'm not really going to show you how the hammer form worked because there's a lot of content out here on YouTube. I think I've even done some hammer form work on my channel. So if you guys are super serious, I can do a test piece on another video to show you how I did it, but I just left it out on this. Again, not to be redundant, and just keep showing the same stuff over and over that you see on a lot of other channels. So I use the hammer form to make the back cap, which is where the taillight's going to bolt, and it gives us this nice rolled edge. It doesn't have that edge weld look to it. So from there, I took our rear panel, and then I tack welded on just a strip to give me plenty of depth. So this is going to be our taillight bucket. It's a little long right now. I have to trim it down. You can see the blue line. That is where our edge is going to start to roll out. So I got to offset that a little bit, trim that down before I go too much farther. So with that, I used our wooden pattern, and I made a 3/16 steel blank with 2 bolt holes in it. And then I took a 1/2-inch steel solid bar, heated it up, and made it match the wood and to the outside of our metal ring, and that's here. And what this is I made a hammer form fixture. So after I do some rough shaping to get that rolled edge to fall out, I can put the bucket into this piece and use it as a hammer form to get the radius nice and consistent. So I'll show you kind of how that works. So here is just our regular bucket that hasn't been super cleaned up yet and doesn't have the edge welded on it. That drops into place. So we're going to do something similar, if I can get this one out of the way. So with this one, with the edge welded on, it's a nice tight fit. We'll push it down in there, and then we can bolt it to my table. But I have to come in, and we're going to have to do some stretch work around this lip first. So that's what's going to be next, is I am going to offset our edge where that blue line is. I'm just going to use some 3/4-inch masking tape. I'll offset that edge, and then I'm going to come in, probably use a power hammer to linear stretch that offset piece. The linear stretch is going to give us our reverse. So it's going to allow that to come up out of the bucket. It's going to allow us to come up out of the bucket and over at an opposing radius, so a reverse. So we'll probably use, I don't know if we're going to use the Pettingill or if we'll end up using the MH37. I haven't really decided yet. Both are capable. We'll just see kind of what my feeling is when I get there. But we're going to do that linear stretch work first, and then we'll come back and we'll put all of this together on the table, and it'll allow me to hammer that and get a nice tidy radius. So I'm going to set the camera up on the tripod. I'm going to offset that blue line with our tape, and we're going to get going. So just like I've done in so many of our other videos, I'm going to use some 3/4-inch masking tape to offset this line. And for you guys that are new to the channel, the reason I like to use masking tape instead of a divider or like a compass to try to offset that edge, it just makes it easier to be nice and consistent. So I've got our blue line here, which is at the top of our hammer form. And I'm just going to take our 3/4-inch tape and stick it to the top of that blue line, and I'll work lining our tape up to that line as I go around, trying to be nice and consistent, because our reoccurring theme in sheet metal is we're going to aim small and miss small. So the better you can be at lining up your tape, the better your trim edge is going to be, and the better everything's going to be. So here we have our edges all offset. I'm gonna take our fine line Sharpie and we'll trace this line, and then I'll come back with snips and we'll finish it off. So like I said, with our fine line or our ultra fine line Sharpie, gonna come in, mark our final trim line. All the way around. So then we have that, and we can peel our tape off. So there you guys can see that is the top of our hammer form edge, and here is our new offset line all the way around. So then I can come in with our snips and we will trim that off. So while trimming, just like we did with the tape, we're going to aim small and miss small, trying to be nice and consistent with every cut. That way it's less filing work later on down the road. Just, if you get in the habit of being very consistent, aiming small, missing small, it's going to make all of your parts and pieces that much nicer. It's just good to get in that habit. That way you're not rushing through things and say, good enough, I'll take care of that later. Because little things like up to a 16th or a 32nd can really affect things in a larger way. You know, if your margin of error gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you add a 16th here and a 16th there and a 16th here and a 16th there, eventually that's going to add up. And I mean, you could be talking 3/8, a ½ inch off. But if you're always working to be consistent and keep your aim point nice and small, it's just going to help you build that good habit that's going to make everything nicer. And I didn't mention at the beginning of this, but these buckets are 18 gauge cold rolled steel, and just like all the sheet metal work, everything's going to be TIG welded. So we'll get this trimmed, and I'm going to come in, I'm going to weld this seam completely solid because we are going to stretch that edge, and I don't want this gap to open up anymore as it comes around. So we'll weld it probably at least halfway down. I might just go ahead and weld that seam completely down just to get it over with, and then we can work on hammering it out when we're linear stretching this section. All right, so now nice straight smooth trim line. I'm going to run the hand file over it real quick just to knock off any burrs and dress it down. So my little shameless plug, I am going to use my Cornfield billet file holder just to file this edge a little bit. All right, so now I'm going to set up the welder and we can weld that remaining seam. So we'll come over here, we'll go over a couple welding settings. So we have our bottle, which is 100% pure argon. No argon CO2 mix on the TIG. We'll flip that on. We're going to adjust our amperage. So we're going to come down, we'll just say 59 amps. So again, that rule of thumb, especially when starting out, is you want 1 amp for every 1/1000th of material thickness. So 18 gauge is going to be right around the 50 to 54 thousandths mark. Depends on the mill run. So I'm just going to give myself a little bit of extra amperage in case I need to bump through some of that. And let's see, where's the pedal? So our flow is about 20, and this is a new bottle, so I'm going to turn that down. We only need about 15 to 20. So that's pretty good on our flow. We're at 59 amps. I'm going to be using 1/16 tungsten, and it's about all the stick out we got. And I will be using an 030 filler rod. So we have our 030 TIG filler. And let me grab the taillight bucket and we'll get this thing welded up. All right, so that's welded up, and while it cools down, I want to talk a little bit about what linear stretching is, does, and how it works. So I'm going to pull the tripod over, and I'm going to draw on the table, show you guys what's going to be happening while we're linear stretching that flange to get that radius on the power hammer. All right, so linear stretch is exactly what it sounds like. So we are going to imagine that just this table is going to be our sheet metal, and this is the shape of our contact patch on our die. Sorry, I'm not much of an artist, but that would be essentially what our die looked like. This is a little bit exaggerated compared to what it's actually going to look like. It's going to have a less aggressive linear line on it. So what it is the metal, when it is impacted, it is going to take the path of least resistance. So your contact patch is here, and as that impact of the flat upper die comes down and makes contact with that, the easiest way for the metal to move is outward, left and right, from the center line of that radius. So linear stretch is you are stretching on a line. If we kind of blow that out, so here is our linear on the sheet metal. As this comes out, it's going to be thinning. And as it thins, it's going to add more surface area. So as you add more surface area, it has to go somewhere. So we can imagine that it's eventually going to spread out like this. You know, we're going to take that material, thin it, add more surface area, and it's going to fan out. So that means it has to go somewhere. So it's going to want to either go up or down in opposing directions because you have that added material. So with it doing that, if we can, if I can draw this, see if I can. So we've got our bucket, which is here, and then we're going to have this little bit of extra material here. So as we stretch that, it's going to thin out and need somewhere to go, so it's going to want to fall this way and this way. Sorry, again, I'm not much of an artist, so it'll essentially create like a reversed cone off the top and give us that shape we're after. So we'll come in, you know, here's our bucket again. We have this extra material. This is the blue line that we just offset, and there's our trim edge. So we're going to linear stretch here, which is going to add more surface area like so, and it's going to allow that to fall out. So hopefully that is a good brief description, not too boring, but that is essentially how the metal is going to react to working with linear stretch tooling. So I'm going to get the power hammer set up, and then the bucket should be cool, and we'll go ahead and start hammering this out, and you will see you'll see it start to fold out. All right, so the bucket is cooled down, and I was going to set up the power hammers, and I ran into a little bit of an issue. So when dealing with smaller parts like this bucket, you run into, can you actually fit it in the machine? So here we have the Pettingill number 1. Well, we can't get into our line because we're running into the machine. So we come over to the MH19, which I was going to, or the MH37, which I was going to use, and I'd already set up with linear tooling, and we're running into about the same thing. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to use the air planisher. So the act of linear stretching is not machine-based. We could do this by hand with basic hand tools. It's just going to take us a while. In my classes, when I teach, we do basic linear work by hand, just so you understand how the process works. So on our air planisher here, we're on the Milwaukee. I've got a flat top upper. There's our linear tool. So now I can fit that in, and we can stretch that edge. So that's what we're going to do, and while I'm talking about it, if you continually stretch to this edge, it's going to stretch at a 90. If you want more of a radius, you're going to have to feather that off a little bit to get that nice flowing radius off. So again, we're not going to stretch always to that line. We're going to try to feather it off so we get a nice even radius coming off of the machine. So with the planishing hammer, it's going to be a little bit slower than it would be if we used the MH37. but we got to do what we have to do. And take a look at how this part is shaped. It's oval shaped or an ellipse. So it's not going to be the same amount of linear stretch everywhere. We're going to need more linear stretch here at the top and at the bottom because our radius is tighter. So it's going to need more stretch to allow that to fold out at the top and the bottom versus side to side because this is a softer radius. So that's something else you want to take into consideration. Pay attention to your parts. See where the most concentrated or more aggressive radius is. That is going to be where you need more stretch or shrink if you're shrinking. But in this instant, we are stretching. So I've got that set up. I'm going to get the camera put on a tripod for you guys, and we are going to start linear stretching. So keep a close look on what the flange is doing. As it stretches, you're going to see it wanting to start to fall away. I'm not wrenching up on the bucket. I'm allowing the metal to move the direction it wants. So I'm just guiding the bucket around so we don't get a bunch of loose edges, but I'm not wrenching up on that bucket in the air planisher to get it to come around. I'm just following what the metal wants. So let me get some hearing protection, camera set up, and we will get to linear stretching for you guys. All right, so hopefully you guys can see it in the video, but if I bring that up, see how it's starting to pull up? It's because we're stretching this edge out, and you can see the linear lines here where I'm stretching on the line perpendicular to our blue edge line there, just like I drew in the diagram. We're thinning it, adding more surface area, and it needs somewhere to go, so it's going to start coming this direction. So I'm going to keep going on this. I might end up changing this upper tool out to another flat upper, but it has a softer radius here. That way I don't dig in here and gouge anything. So that's kind of my goal. So I'm going to move the camera back so you guys can see kind of from a distance. The tripod and the camera is not going to be in my way, but I'm sure when Dom goes to edit this, he's going to speed it up a little bit just so it's not boring for you guys to sit here and watch me do this. And it's going to take as long as it takes. If you're doing this by hand, it's going to be even slower. If you're able to do something similar to this on a power hammer, it's going to be a lot faster. So trust the process, stick to it, don't rush, because especially on reverses can get out of control really quick. So just going to spend some time here, get this reversed out, and then we can put it back in our fabricated steel hammer form and keep moving forward. So stick around as I planish or linear stretch on the planisher, the reverse on the bucket. Now that I've been linear stretching on the air hammer for a while, the panel, you can see, or the bucket, is starting to fan out, like I said. And with that flange being turned out a little bit, we can come over to the MH37 HD, the big hammer, and we can do our linear stretching here, because now that the flange has turned out a little bit, it gives us the clearance we need to be able to work. So this should speed things up a little bit. Instead of using the air hammer, which does work, it just doesn't hit all that hard. Now we can turn up the power hammer and really get to moving that flange around. All right, so after doing the majority of the power hammer work, I came back over to the Milwaukee air planisher and just tidied up the edge a little bit, because the power hammer hits hard and the planishing hammer hits a little bit lighter, so I can blend all of those linear stretch marks out and leave a pretty decent finish, even though we still have a bunch of handwork to do. So it's not perfect. But so what we're gonna do next is I'm gonna walk over to the workbench and we are going to put our taillight bucket into the hammer form, and then I'm going to take our little piece of wood, drop that in, and then this actually bolts down through to these corresponding holes here and here. So this will be bolted down solid to the table. So that's what I need to do next, and then we can take our body hammer and we can hand hammer this, the flange around to get that nice uniform radius, and then we'll be about ready to test it on the car. So there it is, pressed down in there. It's a snug fit, but I don't want it moving around, so I left it kind of tight like that. All right, so now with this bolted down to the table, we can take our body hammer and everything's nice and solid, and we can just slowly hammer this the rest of the way around. We're not gonna go to a full 180 because we do need that to be a gradual taper into the car. So we're gonna get it to where we think's close, and then we will test fit it with the light. And I might have to dig some of the clay out on the quarter to be able to put this in, but we're gonna try to test fit it here in a little bit. So I'm gonna get to hammering, and we'll get this edge folded over with a nice round radius at the top. All right, so I went ahead and got this edge rolled over. You can see that it's rolled over, nice even radius. I went ahead and pulled it out of the hammer form. I got the tail light here, and then Dom's here for the day, so he can ask questions about what's been going on that you guys might want to have answered, and then we can go over to the car and we will do the initial test fit. So I'm going to hand the camera over to Dom and we'll go over kind of what was done. Yep, so we're about ready to test fit it. Did you have any questions, Dom, since a lot of this was done before you got here today?
So what is this for?
This is just the hammer form. I talked about it a little bit, but for you guys that didn't catch it, this is just the hammer form that I had made just to do this radius here and get everything nice and uniform. So this doesn't stay on the car. This is just to do these two buckets, and that's pretty much all it's for.
Okay. Can I see what the taillight looks in there?
Yep. Yep, so this light's chipped, so we won't be using that light, but essentially that's what it'll look like in the car. I don't remember which way's up, which way's down on the light.
Looks good.
Yeah, it's a little French, but not too much. Hopefully the client likes it, but that's one reason I left this only tacked, because if he wants it deeper, at this point I can come back and cut these tacks loose and say he wants it an inch deeper, I can add an inch strip. So it's a little bit more work, but that allows the client to come over and say, hey, I want this a little bit deeper, or I like it. So we'll go over to the car and test fit it. So I went ahead and dug out a bunch of the clay here, just so we had room for the bucket. So just with our first initial fit up, it fits pretty close here and here. It needs to come down a little bit more. And then this, we'll roll that over a little bit more to close that gap up. So it's going to take a little bit of finessing and hammering and dollying to get that all closed in, but I think we're on the right track. And the reason I wanted to test fit it at this point is that way we just didn't overdo it. Like now I kind of know what we need to do with test fitting the bucket in here and seeing just how far it needs to go. All right, so we're going to come back over to the table and we'll pull the light out, and we'll end up just putting this back in the fixture. We'll put the wood back in there to help support it, get it bolted back down to the table, and I will continue to hammer this over a little bit more, noting that it needs a lot more on the sides, and I'll test fit it, and it'll be a bunch of back and forth stuff. So I don't know how much of that we're going to put in the video, just because it's literally just hammering and dollying over the hammer form like you saw just a couple minutes ago when I started to hammer over this radius. So I'm going to get back to it, keep hammering this thing. Hopefully by the end of the day, we'll have it fitting a lot better, and I have some progress to show you.